In the mid-1980s, moviegoers flocked to cinematic blockbusters of almost every genre. Yet for die-hard horror lovers searching for a film with more bite, the summer of 1985 delivered with the release of The Return of the Living Dead. Scary, sexy, gory, and fun, the punk rock zombie movie quickly gained a cult following and introduced audiences to a new breed of fast, talkative, and intelligent undead. Spearheaded by acclaimed writer Dan O'Bannon, known to genre fans the world over as the creator of Alien, The Return of the Living Dead was on its way to becoming a landmark with fans of zombie cinema.
Return of the Living Dead.
I really saw the movie as a offshoot of a Romero zombie flesh-eating horror film.
It's satirical, it's humorous, but never does it go over the top. And I think that's the strength of the story that Dan wrote.
And it introduced concepts that are still working today.
Our zombies can run you down.
It worked. It entertained people. I also don't care whether zombies are fast, slow, or in between.
Dan O'Bannon was an extremely talented writer.
He didn't want a dumb zombie. He wanted to see the thought process that was going on.
I can feel myself rot.
I was watching a TV show and they had a spoof on some zombies and they were looking for brains.
You'll thank me when no one eats our brains.
There was no reference to zombies eating brains until Return of the Living Dead.
It was so different from what everybody else was doing.
Every one of the dead people that are major players are actually characters.
Well, it's very flattering, I have to say, being one of the most famous zombies in the world.
Everyone was going, oh my God, that was great. It was so funny. It was so scary.
It's the greatest send-up since Airplane.
Was it going to win Academy Award? No. Was it a movie that you can be proud of? Yeah, I think so.
It looks like a $25 million movie.
Every step of the way was about cost, about money, and Dan is a difficult personality.
This was a brutal, brutal shoot. And to hear people say today about how wonderful it was, I was like, man, were you on a different film?
It wasn't really a film production, it was a war zone.
And they were nowhere near ready.
There are concessions you have to make. There are times when you have to know when to pick your battles and when not.
We were trying to do something, a little different.
And it turns out it was a great mix of everything.
It couldn't have gone wrong. It was just too neat, too neat.
Movie monsters, ghouls, and goblins have long been a staple of cinema, dating back to the 1890s with the release of what many deemed the first horror film, Le Manoir du Diable, or The House of the Devil. And while the things that go bump in the night had changed considerably over the years, it wasn't until 1968 that audiences were introduced to a new kind of creature that would terrify them to the core.
Did you see that movie, Night of the Living Dead?
We all kept saying we have to make something that really pays off the people that spend their $5 to see a horror film and almost never get their money's worth. That was our motivation in making Night of the Living Dead. Early zombie movies that I saw weren't very exciting, and zombies weren't first-rate fright material like werewolves or vampires. I mean, they just shambled around and maybe threw somebody against the wall or tried to choke somebody, and that was it. So whenever we made them into flesh eaters, that did the trick. That excited people with a visceral kind of fear that was missing before. And so we wanted to carry that forward in the sequel that we wrote called Return of the Living Dead.
John Russo had made a deal, an agreement with George Romero, where George Romero would go off and do his zombie movie, which was Dawn of the Dead, and Russo would go off and do his called Return of the Living Dead. Russ Streiner, Rudy Ritchie, and I had formed a company after we left George Romero's company, and our company was called New American Films. And at that point, the people that shared ownership of Night of the Living Dead, as far as the literary rights, were me and George Romero. So Rudy and Russ and I decided that it was time to do a sequel. So we developed a script called Return of the Living Dead. I kept working on raising money and so on, hooked up with a guy from Chicago named Bill Links. He eventually hooked us up with Tom Fox.
It was pretty clear Tom Fox was the money guy.
Tom was an investment banker from Chicago who essentially had no experience whatsoever in the filmmaking industry.
He had acquired the rights to do a Return of the Living Dead film, and he was doing it as an investment opportunity.
Tom Fox then was going to finance and publicize and do whatever was necessary to raise the big money to do the movie, and he would put up $15,000 to option it for 6 months, and that would expire, and he'd put up another 15 or 10 or whatever the deal was.
As far as him knowing anything about film, as far as I could see, there wasn't anything that he knew about film. He knew how to raise money, that's fine. Films need money to get made.
He was a good producer, and he did make the movie come together with bringing his money.
I have memories of him being there, in and out, sporadically. Very nice.
A lovely man and a charming man.
Tom Fox was a great producer. He died too young.
I don't think I ever asked him why he actually got involved in this script, why he bought it from John Russo.
He just wanted to be in the movie business.
Having made his entry into Hollywood armed with the rights to the Return of the Living Dead, Tom Fox realized his first task would be finding a production company eager to support the project.
Through the early 1980s, I had been working at Universal Pictures on movies like Conan the Barbarian, Conan the Destroyer, things like that. And I was eventually lured away by Orion Pictures. So suddenly this little script lands on my desk one day, and somebody at Orion says, you know, we're thinking of picking this up. We have a production deal with a company called Hemdale.
Orion and Hemdale came into the picture, and it went forward from there.
I actually was running physical production for Hemdale at the time, and when the project came up, I had several other pictures I was doing for Hemdale at that point as an exec. Platoon was being one of them, and after that we went into Return of the Living Dead.
Had they not been fortunate enough to get Graham, the picture probably would not have been finished.
Graham Henderson was like a big grizzly bear and lovable, and when I first think of him, I think of right before we started shooting. It was his birthday, and they had a stripper that was a cop that came and like delivered a birthday message for him. I remember that real vividly because I was like shocked myself.
He's a gem of a guy, but he's very big. He towers over people.
I have to say, the first time I met Graham, I was very intimidated. He looked over at me and said, please come with me. And he took me to his office and sat down behind his chair, and I sat down across from his desk, feeling like I was about 12. And he said, I don't know who you are. If you ruin this, I will ruin you, and you'll never work in this town again.
I'm not sure I said, you know, if you fail, you'll never work in this business again.
Graham doesn't really seem to remember it the same way I do.
Graham was a little more serious because he had a lot to do in a low-budget film.
I didn't like him personally, but I certainly admired his work. That's not true. I liked him very much.
The producers, Tom Fox and Graham Henderson, I remember, had eaten a lot in their lives and were continuing to eat during the production, and they drove nice cars. I remember that they wore large clothes and were well fed. Unlike any of the actors, the artists, or the crew, were starving. It made me want to be a producer.
While the producers worked diligently to keep the film on track, remnants of a 1978 legal battle between George Romero and John Russo over the title and advertising of The Return of the Living Dead were creeping around the production.
It actually had this complicated history that went all the way back to the original Living Dead.
Any time that you do anything that's similar to someone else's movie, you're always going to have some form of legal action take place.
Apparently there was some litigation with the title of the name or something.
George and I were on the phone, still friends and still commiserating with each other and trying to talk sense into everybody else. And I had to go to New York with Hemdale and the Ryan lawyers, and I had to battle to keep the right to the Return of the Living Dead title.
There was really no similarities other than the fact you're talking about zombies eating people.
It was sickening, but I thought they might win, but they didn't. MPAA ruled unanimously, and we got to keep the title. Not that I wanted George to lose. I mean, George and I, through all this mess, remained friends. You know, people think we're enemies or something. No way. We're still friends to this day. I wish George the best in everything he does.
The legal situation was only part of it. The main thing was to try and sell the foreign so as we could cover the finance for the picture.
I know the way that that was done, and is still done a lot of times, is to have a good property, sell off the foreign rights to get production money, then make a U.S. deal and try to work all ends against the middle.
6 months prior to actually getting into pre-production, we actually did a little promo on Return of the Living Dead so as we could sell the picture foreign. And Orion came in later to do the domestic, which covered the rest of the finance.
Then I quickly found out that I was the only person in Orion that had any faith in the movie.
They say, well, horror's dead, we can't make a horror film, but they forget that by the time you make the damn film, 2 years will go by and the glut of horror that exists now, there won't be a glut anymore, and you might be the fresh kid on the block.
As far as whether it's going to be a success, I don't think I expect it to be a, $100 million picture.
Everybody thinks they know, and most of them don't.
In a genre known for countless imitators, it was important to all involved that The Return of the Living Dead stand out from the glut of 80s slasher, zombie, and creature features. Accomplishing that task would start with an exciting and original screenplay.
I came up with an idea that if people would come back from the dead and all those things happened as we portrayed Night of the Living Dead, then there would be a religion, or many religions spring up around that. There would be people that would think that it was going to happen again. So our script started out with the funeral of a little girl. It seemed like a normal funeral until the preacher hands the father a mallet and a spike. And he has to drive a spike through the head of his little girl. And so that's how you shockingly learn that there is a cult, or more than one cult, still existing, and they believe that the dead have to be spiked or burned, or they can come back. And from there, the whole story takes off, and it's really a really good story. So Rudy then took all these different ideas, and he was given the task to write the first draft of the screenplay, and he turned it into a kind of a flippant, adventurous thing. I had this idea that let's deal this time with people becoming their own worst enemy.
Russo and Tom Fox made a deal where Tom Fox bought out the rights to The Return of the Living Dead and then essentially said, I don't want your script, John, I would like another script.
Eventually, Tom decided that he wanted to buy us out. He wanted to make, and he said, I want to make it my way.
There was a script that he had, which was a horrible screenplay, and that's why Dan got involved.
Dan then did the rewrite that made it into The Return of the Living Dead as we know it.
I think everybody, just hearing the concept, got very enthusiastic about it. You know, hey, another horror film, and it's got some crazy stuff in it, and Dan O'Bannon.
O'Bannon, one of the great screenwriters of the 20th century.
I was very happy with the script.
I read it, loved it because I was a huge horror film fan. I was a big fan of the Romero zombie films, and I immediately was like, yeah, this is awesome.
It was going to be a really fun thing to shoot, and the characters were just crazy.
Despite the enthusiasm of many cast and crew, there was doubt among some involved as to whether writer Dan O'Bannon's unique take on the story would work.
When I first read the script, I did not understand it.
I wasn't sure what the tone of the film was the first time I read it.
I was not sure if this was a drama, a true horror film, or what it was.
I thought, I'm not even going to judge it. Maybe it's something I don't know about.
I thought that it wouldn't work. And I turned out to be wrong. Dan had a vision that I didn't have, and he pulled it off.
Dan wrote a very scary script that also functions as a very funny script.
Horror and comedy was in the wind already, of course, because An American Werewolf in London and The Howling, two films of the early 80s, had made a huge splash.
It was something really unusual and kind of gripping.
I said, this is fucking brilliant. This is incredible. I mean, this is one of the first times that someone's actually succeeded in having a tonal shift.
There were some genuinely scary moments in it on paper, and there were a couple things in it that seemed, sort of witty at the same time.
Wow, this is really something different here.
It didn't have me naked in it. That was a sad thing.
With an approved screenplay that combined horror and comedy, the producers began their search for a director capable of bringing the genre-bending film to life.
In the beginning, I was going to direct if and when Tom raised the budget. And then at another point, I brought Tobe Hooper into it because somebody said, well, Tobe has this name for Texas Chainsaw Massacre and so on, and I really didn't at that time.
Tobe Hooper, who of course had directed The Funhouse and other early 80s pictures.
It was just such a great idea.
Now, unfortunately, what happened, Tobe also, almost at the same time, was working for a company called Cannon Pictures.
The film stalled in the beginning when Tobe Hooper was scheduled to direct it, and they had to wait for a year.
Tobe had another picture that he was always prepping, and I think part of the delay put pressure on Tobe to decide whether or not he was going to wait.
He got caught over in England with Life Force and couldn't do the film.
He went off and did his movie, and I think that was, parting of company was between the Hemdale and him was just, a matter of course.
And Tom Fox and Orion were getting a little nervous. They're saying, hey, we have to start this Return of the Living Dead project. So they turned to Dan O'Bannon.
I know deep down Dan always wanted to direct the movie.
I was well aware of Dan. I was well aware of his extraordinary talents as a writer. I had seen Dark Star. I knew about Blue Thunder. I had seen Dead and Buried. These were all credits that Dan had been involved in prior to that.
He was not only an excellent writer and a strong creative force in the whole business, but he turned out to be a good director also.
His inexperience of making movies was something that we had to get through, but he was very talented, very knowledgeable as far as obviously screenplay, so he got very involved in what he really wanted the picture to look like.
An ambitious script coupled with an inexperienced director made it clear that the film would need a talented production designer to help bring Dan O'Bannon's vision to the screen.
First time I met Dan O'Bannon, what I didn't realize is that he was considering me as production designer for Return of the Living Dead, but he wasn't quite sure whether or not I could do the high-tech stuff that was in the film. And then I brought in a cover I'd just done for Alien Worlds, which showed an astronaut sinking into the ground and surrounded by these vicious little creatures. And as soon as he saw that, he thought, Bill can do tech. I want him to design my film.
It was very obvious from the beginning that Dan O'Bannon had a very strong confidence in Bill Stout, who was an extraordinary production designer.
I know he and Bill Stout were like Siamese twins to the hip.
I thought he was a really interesting guy, and I liked him a lot. Very talented man.
Dan O'Bannon is probably one of the most visual film directors I've ever worked with. He's an excellent artist. He can really draw.
I do remember being brought around the office and seeing a lot of the concepts for the creatures and all of that stuff.
We were always on the same page because we had the same set of references. We were both big fans of EC horror comics, for example.
His storyboards gave me the sense of style that I was going to work through in a visual, photographic, cinematic sense. It's like a picture is worth 1,000 words,
With the look of the film settled upon, the producers turned their focus to finding actors who could breathe life into the characters that would soon battle the undead.
Casting Return of the Living Dead was one of the most fun experiences that I had.
Stanzi and I had worked on previous movies. I brought her on to do Terminator originally.
I got involved with Return of the Living Dead because I had done Terminator for Hemdale and met Dan O'Bannon, and we hit it off. And I also had done a lot of horror films. Silent Night, Deadly Night, Motel Hell, some real fun ones. So I kind of had an eye for horror.
Dan, myself, Tom Fox, and Stanzi were always involved in all the casting from day one, essentially. Looking at everyone from, you know, kids to the older men and so on.
When we got to the point of having all the young people together, we had, you know, like our top 3 choices for each role, and we did these mix and matches.
It was fun to actually see them work together, it really was.
We were looking for new actors for the younger roles that would just mesh well because they were supposed to all be friends.
And they did gel, as I say. It worked very well.
Freddie, a newly hired shipping clerk who wears a red baseball cap and a little ring in his ear. Well, I was just an actor looking for a job at the time, to tell you the truth. What stuck out for me about the part was the arc of the character.
Tom Matthews came in really prepared, very into his role already.
I recall meeting Dan O'Bannon for the first time. It was interesting. If he would have put himself in this movie, I always felt that I would have been his character, or he would have been Freddie in some weird way.
He just came with everything that was right for the character.
I went and pierced my ear for the role, and I didn't know that you could have done it fake.
I don't think he'd ever been in a film before.
I didn't have any scenes with Tom, but Tom was brilliant when I watched him.
I admired him enormously. Enormously. I just loved working with him.
You know, was this really sweet kid, and he turns into this brain-sucking zombie, which was kind of cool for me.
Tina, a slender, attractive girl in a plastic miniskirt. The casting process was very interesting, yet somewhat typical. We went to Stanzi's office and read the lines.
With Beverly's role as Tina, we saw a lot of young girls. Again, we wanted the young ingenue, very cute, but she really had to be able to scream, and Beverly was just amazing.
When I first met with Dan, I was asked to go to his house to run lines. And that made me a little nervous because usually you do it in an office. And so I went to his house and walked in, and there was a gun sitting on the coffee table. And I thought, oh my gosh, that's a bit, you know, unnerving. And there was some kind of pornographic stuff on the TV, and I thought, oh gosh, I was getting very nervous at that point. I was only 19, and it really was uncomfortable. And so I just peeked in his kitchen, and I said, oh, Dan, I forgot, I've got an appointment, I have to go. And I ran out the door.
Beverly was really a cute little girl. She was exactly like her little image there.
But on the other note, a lot of people knew he had guns in the house, and I didn't. And had I known that he collected guns, I would have probably been more at ease. But with the TV going and the guns, it was just a very frightening experience for me. What did you do to Freddie?
The most challenging aspect for me for the production was working with Beverly. She was just so beautiful to look at. I was just shaking in my boots. I just wanted to jump on her.
Tom and I, before we got started, Dan had us go on a date, and Tom, I don't think Tom could tell you what we did. I can't tell you what we did, but we did have a date, and we didn't really talk about our roles so much.
Honestly, I don't remember going on the date.
I guess other people think differently.
Sorry, Beverly.
Oh, fudge!
Spider, a tall, black, handsome, good-looking lad with a reggae haircut. I was homeless when I first got to California, so I was still living in the streets when I had this job. They didn't even know that. Nobody in the cast even knew this. I was still living at the Union Rescue Mission.
He came in, and he just had just that perfect, the charm, the energy, and had the right kind of comedic character.
Mr. Nunez kept me laughing all the time. You didn't know if he was being serious or not.
Yeah, what does he think we are? Weird or something? You know, I was excited about going to meet a director. I thought Dan was this big, huge god with halos around him. He was director of a big movie, and I'm gonna be meeting with him.
It's funny, a lot of people think he wasn't like his character.
Miguel wasn't punk. He was like, I thought he was like Prince-like.
You know, I found out he was in a homeless shelter. So he hid who he was very, very well.
I was just loving everybody, happy to be working. I can buy me something and get off the street. That's what my frame of mind.
Chuck, relatively straight looking, a bit shy.
I like death with sex. How about you, Casey? You like sex with death?
My agent sent me the script and said this would be a good movie to get into.
Came in very much in character, dressed the part.
I went on an audition and it turned into like 8 auditions. We had to just keep coming back, and as they worked in different groups of people, they referred to us as the kids. I like that.
John Feldman was just kind of shy and thought a lot and was really into his character quite a bit.
Totally convinced me, even though he wasn't naturally a punk.
I played a nerd, a poser who nobody liked and, you know, was just like out of place. He ends up being an okay person, but he's just way out of place in that movie.
It's just weird when you see yourself so huge on a screen and you see your words, your face, and you know, you don't look good, your posture isn't good, you don't like what you're saying.
I guess that's how I felt too, and that's how I approached the film.
Casey, a sexy, brash, and bouncy girl.
You'd really like to do it with me, wouldn't you?
I love Dan. I met him in a strip joint. He offered me the role of Trash because he saw me naked. And I could not be naked anymore. I was just so done with it.
Jewel was fascinating because she had a lot going on.
I was just a simple girl trying to make my way in Hollywood.
Now, the thing about Jewel, they think you're a young, sexy woman, and the way that you're going to get a part is you sleep with somebody. Well, that's not always the case.
No, I did not do anything to Dan. Just so that rumors that say that because he found me naked, that naturally I must have fucked him. No, sorry, no.
I honestly don't remember that.
So that's one of those weird, it's confusing because I've lost my memory on that issue.
I think a lot of it had to do was she was a stripper, and Dan used to go to the strip joint, and people just confuse that automatically with, oh, you've got to sleep with them if you're a stripper.
So Dan hired me. I said, can I be the party girl? Because, hey, I like to party. So he said, okay. And so basically I got it on that way. I still had to go through the audition process.
She was a woman, so she was scared and crying all the time, and she hated my guts.
No, I don't remember.
I'd be looking at her going, are you going to do it like that? Do you realize the cameras are rolling? How come no one's yelling cut? What are you doing?
I don't want to mention any names. Her name rhymes with fuel peppered, but I kind of let her have it. And I said, I'm so happy to be here, and we're so lucky to have these roles, and this is like a dream come true for me. And you're like, you know, you're a downer. I just thought it's like, you're pissing on my parade here.
I remember that Brian Peck yelled at me. I cried.
I feel bad about it to this day.
Yeah, so why don't you go fuck off and die, Brian?
I love you. Scuzz, male, wears a green mohawk haircut.
We could go fool around in there for a while.
A very dear friend of mine was up for the role of Tina, and she read the script and knew that it was right up my alley and thought I would be good for the part of Scuzz. And I immediately was like, yeah, this is awesome. Let me call my agent. At which point he told me that I absolutely positively was not right for any of the roles in the movie.
Brian Peck was the quintessential sort of preppy, short hair and clean cut and collared shirts.
He was just like really into it, and he was not a punk at all.
My agent pretty much just saw me as a guy who could only play nerd parts. So he refused to send me on Return of the Living Dead. So when my friend was going for a callback, I asked her if she would kindly take my picture and resume in with her, and she passed it off to Stanley Stokes.
He dressed the part, as much as I remember, and just came in, you know, with the whole attitude already going.
At that point, the process became sort of the normal audition process where I did get called in, and I got a call back.
And again, I looked at real punks and actors, and Brian just beat them all out.
And I got cast, and then paid my agent 10% of my salary for a movie he refused to send me out on.
Just a horrible human being.
Welcome to Hollywood.
Do you ever fantasize about being killed?
I do remember Dan had somebody he wanted for Trash, and I honestly don't remember why she didn't end up working out.
I remember when I went in, Stanzi had already cast me in this film, Silent Night, Deadly Night.
Merry Christmas.
And she called me in and they said, they're recasting a film, and it's Return of the Living Dead, it's called. And I was happy because I loved, you know, all the Night of the Living Dead and all that.
I don't remember who the original actress was to play Linnea's part, but I do know she got pregnant, so then Linnea came in and did the role.
And I went in and they said that this girl that they had cast had become pregnant, and she had gotten pretty big, so they couldn't use her. So I auditioned for Dan and Graham and Stanzi again, and I got it, and I was thrilled. I was glad she got pregnant, man. Legs. Also a girl. Sexy, but very weird. I remember reading it when it was first, my character was called Legs, and then they changed it to Trash. I really liked the name Trash. It was a great name for the character because she was kind of trashy, kind of, you know, gutter.
Linnea was over the moon scary punk stripper. She scared the shit out of me.
We had to have the actresses actually do a striptease in the audition, and we had to see how comfortable they were with their bodies.
It never bothered me about the nudity. My dad was a doctor, so it didn't really faze me a lot. You know, everybody back then was so uptight about nudity, though. You know, you're not going to work again if you do nudity. But, you know, to me, it was like a great opportunity.
She didn't give a shit about all of that morality crap. She's an actress, one of the best.
I would have been nude if anybody had asked me, and I was a little hurt that they didn't.
And she was just a wonderful trooper. She did her role so beautifully.
I love the scene where I was like just groping and grabbing and just, you know, going for Suicide's scrotum.
I like it spooky.
It was just like one of those scenes where I wanted an Academy Award for it.
She rubbed the crotch of the rocker. Just rubbed it frontal, right to the camera, and just rubbed it.
Show some fucking respect for the dead, will ya?
Suicide is a skinhead. He looks like a coconut. He wears a dog collar around his neck.
Mark Venturini, who played Suicide, they put in all the leather pants and the leather jacket and the chains and all of that kind of stuff.
Mark Venturini was a bigger than life kind of guy. But he was like a teddy bear.
Mark was the kind of guy that was like someone you'd want to marry.
I just think he's one of the nicest guys I ever met.
It's so funny because he was like 6'6". He was so huge, broad shoulders, big imposing guy, obviously perfect for the role.
I was really intimidated actually by Mark Venturini because the first time I met him, he was in the full gear as Suicide.
Scram, wimp!
I admired him, and then as it turned out, he was actually a really good actor because he was a sweetheart.
I literally think I remember him smiling, laughing, making goofy faces, being a jokester.
He's always on time, very professional, and very much into character, and he did a fantastic job in the movie.
Mark Venturini was absolutely an awesome dude. Hated to hear what happened to him.
We found out he died, and he was so young, and it was not that long after Return of the Living Dead.
At first, I heard a rumor that he was in a crash, like doing a movie, the stunt car went over or something. And then I found out it was leukemia, and none of us knew, and it just broke my heart because, you know, why do such horrible things happen to a great person like that?
He was just a big cuddly love bug, and we all miss him.
In addition to the cast of young punks, the movie would also feature vibrant adult roles that would bring another dynamic to the film.
The boss goes out, leaving Frank, a 45-year-old factory foreman, alone with Freddie.
They ship those bodies here.
One of the very first actors that were cast for Return of the Living Dead in the Tobe Hooper version was Jimmy Carran.
I'm not sure that Jimmy did too much of an audition in the true sense.
I slept with everybody and wanted to get the role. I wanted it so badly. Everybody. No, how did I get the job? I met with Dan and said, you know, if you have somebody else in mind, I'll be very disappointed, but I would understand that. You don't have to take me just because Tobe wanted me.
I didn't know who he was, and the face, and I missed the Pathmark.
Come to Pathmark Super Coupon Bonanza.
But I said, who is that guy? He's wonderful.
He's so real. I mean, there's nothing artificial about him. One of the great character actors of our business, I believe.
He loves acting, he loves actors, and he loves making movies, he loves Hollywood.
Jimmy and I, we had a lot of scenes together. It was a fun, the best memories for me were Jimmy and I would be in the makeup chair, first ones in the morning usually. But the stories that he would tell were just priceless.
I was a huge Poltergeist fan, so the fact that I was like, you know, playing scenes with the guy who moved the headstones but left the bodies, didn't you, was really cool.
A lot of people think he's the best thing in it.
His energy on the set was just so positive all the time. If I was a producer, I would just hire him for that reason alone, just to have him around.
I like to be on a set with people, meet new people, and keeps you young.
Ernie wears a jogging suit, smokes a pipe. He appears to be completely absorbed in his work. He's wearing a pair of earphones.
Having worked with Don on 1941, definitely he was like the top of my list for the part in this. And I was also a big fan of his from 10.
From now on, we do it in the dark.
Don Calfa was really into it. I mean, he went, you know, to great lengths.
I knew what I wanted to do with the earphones. I came in and, you know, I just boogied around.
He was tremendous. He came in, he's had a great look to him.
I remember seeing a clip of Don Calfa and Dan going, look at those eyes. I gotta have those eyes in the movie.
He looks like Peter Lorre. Don Calfa was brilliant.
When Dan decided that the character should be Germanic, I think Don just won us over.
I had a mustache at the time and longish hair, and he said, would you, you know, cut the mustache, would you? And I said, absolutely, I'll shave my head, I'll dye it blonde. You know, he's German, I'd love to do that.
I know the mortician Don Calfa played it realistically.
I spoke to an actor friend of mine as soon as I got the part. What's your character's name? Ernie Kaltenbrunner. You gotta be kidding. No, why? He said, Ernst Kaltenbrunner. Yeah. Do you know who he is? I said, no. He was a high-ranking Nazi, had a dueling scar, and was hung at Nuremberg.
Don was just, he brought a certain life to his role in the movie and his part.
With casting nearly complete, director Dan O'Bannon still found it difficult to fill one very important role. So the search continued even as a start date loomed over the production.
The boss, Bert Wilson, is closing up for the weekend. He calls out to his last 2 men. No matter what happens, don't name it after me.
Clu Gulager was cast very late in the process.
He was the last person, I believe, on the set.
I honestly don't remember why we cast Clu at the last moment. I had put Clu on my list of ideas because I was a huge fan of his.
So I guess that if I weren't the first choice, probably in the first 35.
They were trying to get Scott Brady, and Scott was ill. I had just finished a picture with Scott and had suggested Scott.
I remember at one point they had made an offer to Leslie Nielsen, and that didn't work out. And then next thing I knew, I had heard that Clu Gulager had been cast, and he literally started the next day.
He was a marvelous actor, and they were very fortunate to get Clu.
I don't think we have a choice, Frank.
Bert was bow-legged. He liked to take off his shirt because Bert basically was an exhibitionist. This wasn't shown on the screen, you know, subtext. Other than that, I would say that Bert came out of my gut.
And I thought, oh, this would be interesting. He's never done a part like this. He's never done a horror film. It's something outside of his comfort zone.
I'm sure from his perspective, this wasn't one of the better parts in his career.
Oh, absolutely. Every minute it was in danger of being too ridiculous.
I think that he didn't quite understand what I was doing, and I didn't understand what he was doing. I mean, it certainly worked in the picture.
You stupid moron, you idiot! What's the matter with you, Frank?
And I thought he was terrific in the part. He and I didn't always get along together, although we do now.
I wanted to play the part. Beverly Randolph played so well. But Dan said, get off my back. And that was it.
With a cast of newcomers and Hollywood veterans in place, O'Bannon arranged for 2 weeks of rehearsals to prepare his talent for the shoot.
I think Dan did a brilliant thing by having everybody rehearse for a couple of weeks prior to starting to shoot.
Dan directed the movie in rehearsal.
Staged everything. Taped, floors taped, the whole deal.
You almost never get rehearsal on a film, particularly a low-budget film. So I was really shocked.
I think that was what made the picture what it was.
It kind of made everyone gel.
I enjoyed it from the standpoint that we really got to know each other.
We had that luxury of going through the script and really getting comfortable with our characters.
It was just great. We'd sit around and we'd read these lines, and it was really a special time.
And I remember we sat in like dining room chairs and pretended we were in Suicide's car, and a bunch of the different kind of group punk rock scenes.
Just to hang it out, because we had so much fun. You know, every time you hear me, we like a family. But we hung out a lot. We laughed and joked.
And everybody learned their lines, everybody got acquainted, and we began to fool around and kid.
And we changed lines here and there. Gee, what? Oh yeah, I love that, I love that, I love that. Different suggestions.
We had a freedom. I mean, I could say anything to anybody there, and they knew what the hell I was talking about or where I was from. And they could say anything to me.
Jimmy Karen would go, and I didn't know who he was, and he was like, just remember, we're working. And I would look at him going, God, I hope that I am not like you when I get older. You're so embarrassing, like a cheerleader. You come to this low-budget D-horror movie, and you're like telling us how stoked we should be. It's fucking 100 degrees, we're in some shitty warehouse, and you're like, we're working. And I'm like, this is a fucking drag. And I firmly grasp the motto, you mock what you will become. I would be only so lucky as to be as, wonderful a person as Jimmy Karen.
While most of the cast honed their characters and found time to bond during rehearsals, 2 performers were not lucky enough to be included in the experience.
I wasn't in on the 2 weeks rehearsal the kids had.
Clu sort of missed out on that bonding period, and, Clu really had to hit the ground running.
So I came in there like an idiot and just started saying lines, not knowing what I was saying.
I wasn't involved in any of that. And in retrospect, I think that was absolutely the right thing to do, because they're not going to do improv playing pinochle with the tar man just to figure out what his childhood was like.
At that same time, we were working on wardrobe and different things were happening.
That was when we were doing costume fittings and makeup tests and all of that sort of stuff.
They kept putting me in these real prissy little skirts and sweaters with bows, and I just kept putting them on and going, oh, I just am not feeling this. This doesn't feel like Tina to me. And then Miguel walked in this great outfit. I go, oh my gosh, that's what I want to wear.
That white pants you got on that shirt, that was actually what I wore like a week or 2 before.
I did not witness this with my own eyes. I'm having such a hard time picturing Miguel wearing that outfit. Really? I mean, it was the early 80s, so I guess that's an excuse. Kind of.
So I'm not disappointed at all that I didn't get to be punked out. I'm actually relieved.
I love the style that I had with the leg warmers, because I'm a leg warmer lover. I mean, I'm an 80s girl, I guess you'd say. And so with the leg warmers and, the boots and the shorts and, the leopard skin top, it was just like a great look to have. I loved wearing it.
I hated my look and I hated my wardrobe. I mean, I wish I had said that out loud.
I wanted to be a real, kind of gritty street punk guy. I actually suggested more of a kind of a British mod punk look, which was kind of what was going on that time in the 80s in England. All of the buttons and all of the stuff on it, I went and found those various places. A friend of mine who actually was kind of into punk rock music and stuff actually loaned me a lot of those. I got to give those back to her. It's been 25 years.
This place is a mess.
Yes, Dan had originally said he really wanted, all the punks to really be punks.
When I bid the film, I was told absolutely all of those actors would be real punk people. They would have their own mohawks, their own shaved heads. Then they came back to me and said, well, we've changed. All of the people we've cast are normal-looking performers, and we have to make them look like punks.
And they were going back and forth discussing whether my mohawk was going to be makeup or real. And in my mind, it was always like, well, no, I'm going to shave my head and get a mohawk because anything else would look ridiculous. And so Bill Munns did a makeup test on me. It just looked like something out of Barnum and Bailey's low-rent circus.
I had no background whatsoever in doing the particular punk's hairstyling.
And I freaked out and thought, I'm not going to go in front of a camera looking like a complete gooftard.
It's my understanding that at that point they went to a hairdresser who did the necessary head shaving, trimming, the mohawks, the color tints, the strange patterns.
Myself, Mark Venturini, and Don Calfa all got our hair did. And we went to a guy named Attila, who was like the premier punk rock hairstylist of the day.
And they became these radical punk rockers all of a sudden.
Mark got his suicide haircut, and I got my crazy mohawk.
My hair was stripped and dyed blonde 3 times, and it never come back.
This hairdressing shop apparently was certainly well qualified to create the look on the characters, but they made no allowance for their day-to-day or week-to-week maintenance on the set.
With pre-production, casting, and rehearsals finally complete, filming on Dan O'Bannon's New Breed of Zombie movie was ready to begin on July 9th, 1984.
This film begins like it's got the greatest beginnings. I love the way this film starts.
Are we gonna party tonight or what? The scene when we're walking down the street was a lot of fun.
That first wide shot of all of us, the camera and the crew were literally across a really wide street with a, long lens on a dolly track.
And I remember we were walking, and it's like all of a sudden we all felt this power that we're in this movie and we're all in it together and we're in this group.
It was really exciting, and we all looked so different from our rehearsals, and it was just amazing.
And as actors, we were all wearing the little microphones with the, remote pack. And those are the things you sometimes forget that are on. And one particular cast member was being a bit crabby and complaining a fair amount. I don't even remember what did I say she?
There was this issue with Jewel.
During the filming of it, I was always trying to help her, because she was trying to be an actor or something. I don't know what she was trying to do, but I was trying to help her, and she would be dissing me.
Oh my God, I don't remember.
That's how it was working with Jewel.
While the young punks were resolving their issues outside, Freddie was inside Uneeda Medical Supply, being trained on his new and very interesting job.
The kid's gonna stick with me and then I'll show him the ropes.
Tommy was like a kid in a candy shop.
I really enjoyed the split dog and the bag scene.
These are split dogs.
And I started building this Labrador, this large black Labrador. It was this massive thing, and as I'm building it, I'm realizing we're not going to have enough time to finish this. And I switched gears pretty quickly at that point, and we went with the smaller one.
He pulled it off and did a really good job.
The characters of Frank and Freddie would also be responsible for accidentally unleashing a mysterious and very dangerous chemical.
What chemical? 2, 4, 5 tryouts.
I love it when Frank goes down and is showing, him these army drums.
There they are. And then Tommy and I open up, I was going to say can of worms, I think I mean can of gas.
I like the guys getting sick from the barrel.
And it just breaks, and all this stuff just comes flying out, and it's like they're coughing and they're falling all over the place. It's like this really, it's not even tongue in cheek, it's right out there saying, about the US Army, how they do things.
With the Army drums broken and 2,4,5-trioxin released, the film's undead menace was let loose upon an unsuspecting cast of characters.
And suddenly, when everything is becoming alive again, reanimating, the butterflies on a board, pinned butterflies, he just put a fan, an electric fan, and pointed it at the frame, and all the wings just moved from the air. And it cost $0.50, and it was just wonderful, wonderful effect.
Okay, my favorite shot in the entire movie is the cadaver that's hanging from the bag, from the big meat hooks in his head. You watch it twitch and come alive.
The yellow corpse became reanimated. We see him first hanging in the cold room.
And we have this tracking shot into him as he starts quivering.
It was marvelously staged. He bursts out of the cold room and overpowers Clu.
I tell you what I think worked in it. A blend of the comedy, the ridiculousness, with the seriousness.
I was actually laughing and horrified at the same time, watching some of the scenes in the movie, particularly when we were cutting the yellow corpse's head off.
We put him down, get him down, and of course, the dialogue was terrific. It worked in the movies. It just was an inspired scene, which Dan conceived and wrote. And then, of course, he ended up being sawed up.
Give me the bone saw.
I wanted a shot of Tommy and me looking at each other, each mouthing the word bone saw, which they couldn't do. They didn't have the time to do it, but I thought it was funny.
An effective, horrific, and amusing character on screen, bringing the Yellow Corpse to realistic, undead life proved to be more challenging than anyone had anticipated.
The Yellow Cadaver, which ended up being a headless character, was particularly challenging, and from my effort, actually not very successful.
Oh my God. Neither Dan nor I could believe it when Bill revealed the original Yellow Man.
The method that I used of trying to build up the shoulders, the head, and put the head in the neck and then be able to cut the neck off was not the ideal circumstance for creating that illusion.
I feel bad for the guy. Again, he was very nice, but I saw what I saw, and it weren't good.
Basically what I saw were Polaroids of someone who was painted yellow with dental dam wrapped around their shoulders up to the top of their head, and that was supposed to be the headless corpse. That's not going to work.
I was expected to produce a full-body figure without a head that could run around, and we could be filmed head to toe. That meant a live person. The only way to accomplish that is to try and build the shoulders up high enough that the head's actually in the neck area, and then you can cut the neck off at the top of the head.
To think that the guy thought it could pass on film, it blew both our minds.
It was later redone by Kenny Myers, and it was done much better.
So the first order of business was create something that would function, to actually build a full pullover body puppet to put on an actor with a severed neck.
What Kenny Myers produced and when he came on board actually was definitely a superior result and looked very fine, as much as I could say.
There's an old adage in the film industry that there's no money to do it right the first time, but there's plenty to do it again.
With one of the first and most complicated effects complete, the time had come to film something the cast and crew found just as difficult, if not downright shocking.
We're all in front of the camera looking up at Linnea, and she's dancing, and it's the best scene in the movie.
I just remember when I did the tombstone scene that I was nervous. I was not sure what I was going to do when I got up on the tombstone. I just got in the groove and did it, and I didn't ever think that it would be like a big deal in the movie or anything like that.
I thought Tonight We'll Make Love Till We Die was perfect for Linnea to dance to, for Trash to dance to. She did a beautiful job. What a body.
We were playing a different song, of course. We were not playing Tonight. We were playing Nasty Girl by Vanity. And, you know, I just like was, you know, shaking my butt. And I remember Miguel down below.
Some of my fondest memories was Linnea titties.
She danced nude on the tombstone. That broke a lot of rules in American filmmaking at that time.
I didn't know that she was going to take all her clothes off, like, for real. I didn't know that.
She had like perfect titties. They were like two pyramids. Like in Egypt, if Egypt set up, Linnea, I'm starting to sweat.
When Linnea was dancing naked, I loved the flames and the look of everything and the color and the lights.
And it was astounding. It was so effective. People were just sort of mesmerized.
I never knew a person could be naked on a set. So I was in shock.
And we were in the middle of shooting that scene when Graham Henderson showed up and said,
"Oh my God, Dan! You can't show pubic hair on a film?"
and he just went ballistic. So Dan very calmly called me over. He said, you know, take Linnea and shave her.
I was so embarrassed I could have died.
She was shaved, and we set up the scene again. She started dancing, and Graham says,
"Oh my God, it's worse. You can see everything."
They wanted her to look like she had no body hair, but they still did not want to be able to actually observe certain anatomical aspects of her body.
I'd never seen a woman without any hair, for one. Those days are over. And I'd never seen a woman, you know, who didn't have any genitalia.
I got a call from Graham Henderson, who said they're sending Linnea over to me and that I have to make a prosthetic piece to cover the area of her body which would normally be covered by a very skimpy bikini bottom.
And then I had to do that, and how I had to go in and get a mold made. And I had no idea how they were going to make the mold. It ended up I had underwear on, and they just poured the alginate in my underwear and then just pulled it off. So it was kind of weird.
We made a plug, a seamless plug, so that she looked sort of like a Barbie doll.
There's no anatomical reality there.
When I saw that, I was like, I don't know, like, what the fuck? There's nothing there. Or am I just not looking in the right spot? Have I lost my eyesight? Am I losing my mind?
For those guys under me with the darkness and just with the road flares, it must have looked really odd.
When I saw the movie, I was still like, what the hell is that? But it's awesome. That's the way I like it now, actually. It was very prophetic.
The only thing I remember about that scene was burning the living crap out of my hand with that damn road flare. I'm dancing around like, hey, there's a naked chick. And what I'm really doing is like, oh my God, my hand is getting third-degree burns.
I do remember very vividly the sulfur from the road flares coming up into my head and making me a little bit high.
It is like Japanese porn. It's great. Is that bad? Do you think I'm weird? I feel a little weird.
And while everyone was enjoying the graveyard festivities, the problem of the escalating undead was becoming more and more apparent and unsettling.
The next time you see the yellow corpse, you don't see him because he's in little black bags. We've cut him into a million little pieces, well, certainly into maybe 25 or 30 pieces, and we're taking him to Don Calfa's strange morgue.
What makes it comical is the confusion. Here he's coming in, which he's not supposed to be there anyway, and he comes in with two other people, which is really, really out of line.
We are carrying him on a stretcher. The bags are wiggling because they've got body parts in there. When Don looks at these things moving, he says, "What are they?" And Clu played it beautifully because there's a pause. He's not quite sure. He hadn't thought of that. And he says,
Rabid weasels.
Rabid weasels.
I played it to the best I could. I'm not the greatest actor in the world, but I tried to play it realistically.
Dan pulled that scene out and I think made it very funny. What? And the rest is history.
Though the characters had seemingly put an end to their reanimated problems, another zombie was about to make its undead debut and a mark in cinematic horror history.
Something starts to shuffle forward out of the shadows. It is a hideous, horrible monstrosity. It is the body that was in the tank. The clearest memory I have of the audition process was Dan telling me specifically that he wanted to see this zombie character thinking.
I always insist on all my creature suits, never cast a stuntman, always cast an actor.
I was a puppeteer at the time, but my training was as an actor, and I had done work as an actor also. So I went in and met with the casting director, and then it was a callback for Dan.
We needed someone as slender as possible, so there would be room to build up on certain areas and then show indentations or emaciated areas elsewhere.
Because of his ability to move in such a way that it looks like his bones are not connected to each other. He was just phenomenal. He brought that suit to life.
You know, I didn't ever plan too much or choreograph the movements that I did for Tarman. I really treated it like an acting exercise, like I had this physical impairment.
The cameras were rolling when I first saw Alan. They kept Tarman and I separate until they actually shot the scene because Dan wanted to get a real reaction.
I just saw this Tarman guy all covered in KY jelly, not in a sexual way.
I'm supposed to be something strange and unusual. You don't want to get too used to it. You want that sort of shock of, what the heck is that thing?
Alan Troutman really takes the center stage for Tarman. He really took it and made it live, and that was really special.
He really made that character come alive, that monster.
I would say without a doubt it's one of the most distinctive characters of the first film.
Working with Bill Munns was interesting because it was building the whole suit. He had me come into his garage workshop and actually sort of stand there while he applied all of these individual pieces of foam latex, which made the drips onto the base, which was just like a leotard.
Bill Munns started to finally rise to the occasion, and he began to construct a pretty darn good Tarman suit.
We needed a character where literally the flesh looked like it was sort of dripping off of the body. So in this particular case, I was actually using hot melt vinyl. I would actually melt it down and then pour it on sheets of aluminum foil so that it would form large dripped sections, and these dripped sections were then built up on the body to make the bodysuit.
I would get in the pants, essentially, and suspenders were important because you wouldn't want Tarman's pants falling down all the time, I suppose. And then the top went over that, and then the head was glued on after that.
We took the head completely apart. I believe it was just a pullover mask. We actually mechanized it so it would function a little bit better and work for more than one day.
Most of my time on the set, I had the head on, so it's not like I could converse easily. It kind of put people off, I think. The thing is making noise. Let's walk away.
I didn't see him as a human being. I just saw him as this freak that was in this thing. I thought maybe some guys were back there working it. It wasn't until he took his head off and I saw that he was, in fact, human that I felt really sorry for him.
And who's in there? Who's in there?
He's the most famous zombie in zombie movie history. I don't know, is there any better zombie in a horror movie than Tarman from Return of the Living Dead? I've never, ever seen one. A living zombie. That guy created something that no one will ever touch.
The lucky recipient of Tarman's shocking first appearance would be actress Beverly Randolph, who found herself completing the scene with bumps and bruises, but not due to her scuffle with the iconic zombie.
I don't think I was on the set when the stairs broke.
I was a bit afraid to run up those stairs and fall through, and so he sent me off to makeup, and he put in the fake step. And when I came back in, he says, okay, we're gonna just practice this.
The issue with Dan was that he didn't always have the greatest social graces about how to explain what he wanted.
And I went running up the steps, and down I went, right through, and I was black and blue from my hip to my ankle, and it hurt very badly, and that's why you see me on that floor laying there for a few minutes. Everyone's like, well, why doesn't she get up and run? I was in pain. I was very uncomfortable. And so I think his style was a little rough.
It was at this point in the film that the energy, scares, humor, and gore would all be heightened, beginning with the graphic death of one of the main characters.
I remember when Suicide was supposed to get bit by the tar man. He was so mad that he was dying. And we came to my room, we were talking, and he was telling me how we beat it up. We knock his head off. You know, why you gotta die? And I couldn't tell, you know, it's in the script, dog.
You know, when I ate Suicide's brain, Dan really wanted the shock of all of this to be fresh. And it was the first kind of physical struggle I was having. And, you know, he's a big guy. So it was like, it was all I could do just to keep standing up and not fall on my keister and kind of embarrass the tar man. That wouldn't have looked too good.
Though the design and character of Tarman was deemed a success, the film still required a large number of other zombie menaces and their graveyard home to be created.
Dan wanted a very packed look to the cemetery. We rented every single tombstone, grave marker, crypt that was available from Universal Studios. I also designed a lot of very special tombstones of our own and crypts of our own. Dan's favorite was a sculpture I designed called the Weeping Angel.
The challenging aspect would be the one for everybody, believing in zombies.
The thing is coming out of the ground, the skeleton.
In a literally bare human skeleton, we had absolutely no interior space to accommodate the mechanics. So I had to actually run all of the cables pretty much up through the spinal cord of the actual skeleton, because it was a real skeleton. It was purchased from a biological supply, and it was real human bone.
I know there were some issues there.
When he showed me the first corpse, I thought he was just showing me the mechanics. I did not realize he was showing me what he considered finished art.
My focus on that particular thing was more about the performance of the mechanics itself.
How can a skeleton that has been buried under the ground and has come back to life, how can it be perfectly pristine and white?
We loaded it into the grave, dug the hole, put the box in, the whole animatronic structure and everything. And a lot of the inspection of it was during the daytime. I would have to wonder if perhaps someone inspecting it in the daytime in bright sunlight might have thought it was a little too clean or pristine or such.
And so when that ended up in the film, I was absolutely horrified.
The end result was they weren't happy. They weren't happy with what they were getting.
To this day, I cringe every time I see that first corpse pop up out of the ground.
It was those issues which proved to be the beginning of the end for effects artist William Munn's time on the picture.
With the zombies that Munns produced, he just didn't put enough thought into them. I did research and found pictures of real mummies and things, the mummies of Guanajuato, Mexico. Those were crucial in the design of a lot of the corpses.
Dan decided that's what he wanted his zombies to look like. He said that's perfect. And he also said he did not want any kind of injury color on them, because that's what George Romero did on his Living Dead movies, and Dan did not want to copy anything that George Romero did.
Bill, being a Loki guy, didn't stand up for himself with Dan, didn't argue about what he thought was right and what wasn't, tried to accept everything that Dan wanted, and unfortunately couldn't come up with what Dan needed.
I did very clear paintings and drawings of what I thought they should look like, and Mr. Munns did not deliver to my satisfaction on those.
I was looking at some of the stuff Bill was coming in with, and rather egotistically thought, I could do it better than that.
I think Bill will tell you that maybe the money wasn't there for him.
There was not a great deal of budget, and so they were looking for everything to be kept as economical as possible, both in terms of time and cost.
I think just the nature of shooting a low-budget movie has its own anxieties built into it.
Oh, every moment was tense.
When you're working on a show, and any minute when you're doing the right thing, somebody may blow up on you and have an incredible tantrum, tell you you're doing it wrong and everything else like that, it puts you in a frame of mind that pretty much destroys your morale.
It was, I think, a combination of just not being up on his game in the makeup, field that really led to his demise in the film.
I don't think Bill was surprised. I think he knew the writing was on the wall.
Yeah, I was fired. Yeah, it's not my best work. Yeah, I've had a lot of criticism on it.
He's been beat up for about 26 years now.
Getting Bill off the film, which is what both Dan and I wanted to do, was so difficult.
It's never easy to fire anyone off a movie. You try and do it as nicely as possible.
But when I left the production, the immediate feeling was relief, actually.
With William Munns off the picture, there was little time to reflect on past mistakes, as the production still had large-scale sequences to complete, in conditions many cast and crew had come to dread.
Shooting the graveyard scenes in the rain was, cold and pretty miserable and really damp. And did I mention it was cold and it was wet?
You work these night shoots and it's rain and it's hours, 16 hours of rain, and then you go get some sleep for like 4 hours and you have to come back to another 16 hours of rain. So that was very challenging.
Night shooting is difficult, to get used to.
It's interesting because poor Beverly, who was just freezing, I remember covered in goosebumps and turning blue, there's a scene where she has to run and fall in a mud puddle.
And I feel so bad because Miguel and Brian had to keep picking me. It got to a point where I couldn't get up myself. I was so tired.
I'm sorry, Beverly. I was having so much fun stumbling and falling in the muddy mud hole that I was like, let's just keep doing it more and more times.
I just remember Dan going, okay, he'd pull his chair up and he'd go, okay, let's just do that again. And it's like, how many times can you see me falling through the mud? He goes, let's get a close-up now of that.
It's so weird. Beverly and I have such a different perspective on that scene because I was loving every take and Beverly was like, kill me.
Looked dirty, wet, and gross.
And this is the honest to God truth. Dan made us do that scene so many times, I think almost to just torture Beverly.
That was a really rough one.
But actress Beverly Randolph wasn't the only person who found the chilly, wet graveyard scenes difficult.
It was really hard being in the cold, cold nights when I get my wish of dying, having like 20 extras who all want to be seen, just coming and clawing at me in mud and not knowing if I was going to drown or be beaten to death by these zombies. I was like going, oh man, when they call action, they're gonna just start going like crazy. That was a little scary.
Also scary, or so the filmmakers hoped, would be the massive zombie resurrection scene, something which had come to be expected in a film where the undead return to life.
When I saw it on film, I was like, oh my God, it's a zombie movie. They're coming out of the ground. Fuck, how did you do that? When I saw it on film, I was like, how the hell did you do that?
One reason I thought that Dan's movie wouldn't work was that I didn't think he would pull off all the effects with the rain and the water soaking into the graves on such a low budget. How did I know what he was going to get for free and what effects people he could enlist to pull that off?
I am the zombie that crawls up through the dirt. They called it, Dan referred to it as the ant farm shot. And we actually surprised Dan O'Bannon and everyone without telling them who they had gotten to play the zombie. And when they showed up to shoot it, there I was made up, because my face was not made up because you only saw me from behind.
I wasn't the only one to pull double duty on the film, as producer Tom Fox decided he wanted to join the fun too, setting the stage for more than one conflict with director Dan O'Bannon.
Tom insisted that Tom's wife and kids be in the movie, and he wouldn't take no for an answer, so Dan said, sure, fine. Well, Dan came to me and the makeup person, and he said, okay, I want them to show up for makeup at 5 a.m., and I want you to put on the most uncomfortable, itchy makeup you can design.
Dan proceeded to make them sit around about 10 hours all day long.
And it was so frustrating, and Dan said, your scene's coming up, just wait, just wait. And finally we got to the end of the day, oh, sorry, we didn't have time to do your scene. You'll have to show up for makeup again tomorrow morning. And they never showed.
And I know Tom felt he had done that on purpose to get back at him, and really held it against him.
Dan was not awkward in his social grace, but he wasn't interested in pleasing anybody.
He had a reputation for being prickly.
Dan O'Bannon's directing style was frightening for me.
Sometimes he could be very charming, very gregarious, and other times he could be unbelievably cold and just a stern person.
As far as directing, he was very giving. I never heard no from him. It was really a collaboration.
Once I was cast, he never talked to me. He never said another word. He was busy doing things I didn't understand. I never got yelled at. I never got directed.
Well, if there were any kind of issues with Dan and anybody, I mean, you don't see it in the movie. I mean, maybe it even helped having that, you know, kind of like, you know, angst and all that, because, you know, everybody is going through it.
I loved working with him. He was open to things, he listened, and he was very precise.
I think, you know, a lot of the people that were just, you know, goofing off got it the most, or had different ideas than Dan did.
He was different, and when you're dealing with different types of people, you know, you have to talk to them differently.
His style was a little rough. I remember him too grabbing me sometimes and going, "You're to go this way." And I'm thinking, oh my gosh, you know, I feel abused. But at the time, I would never have said anything because I was young. And I thought, okay, if this is the way it's supposed to be, this is the way it's supposed to be. And I took it.
I'm sure we gave him a lot of guff. I know I did.
Dan and Clue, you know, were not the best of friends during the shooting.
I didn't feel that Dan was prepared. Quite frankly, I thought that he didn't know his ass about making movies.
Clue was an actor that came from, you know, a different way that Dan was ever directed before. Clue had his ideas of how he wanted things done.
I was there when Clue was saying things like, "You don't understand actors, you don't have any respect for actors, and I'll never work for you again," and Dan was saying things of equal fervor and heat.
He clashed with Dan numerous times.
And I'm not sure why. I think Clue felt they were going in a different direction. He was worried about how he was going to come off.
Clue just wanted to be given a little more respect and handled with kid gloves a little more, or given more options as an actor of different ways to play things. And Dan was just like, "No, I want it like this."
I was tense and nervous all through this filming. It took me a long time to snap into things, I feel.
I think Clue a couple times was like, so.
And Dan's here going, "And this is what I want. I want you to act it out like this. I'm going to sit there. This is how you walk into the camera. This is how you do this." And Clue's like, "No, I'm not gonna, you know, I don't know. I don't like the way you're speaking to me." So yes, Clue got out of bat and ran after Dan. And Dan sat there screaming, "He's gonna kill me! He's gonna kill me!" It was really funny to watch.
There was that one day when Clue had finally had it with Dan, and he took a can and threw it directly at Dan, and Dan had just gone through a door, and it hit that door and made a huge boom.
He missed him, fortunately, and hit the set and walked off.
He was my hero that day because it's something I wanted to do so badly. And, you know, I couldn't. I was 19 and I had to keep my mouth shut and just do my job. And so when he did that, I was like, "Ah, oh, yes, yes, yes."
I don't know where they got that, but it's totally untrue. I'm a professional actor, would never throw anything at anybody on the set. It stands corrected as of now.
I never knew any of this stuff was going on the set.
It was really funny to watch, and I sat there smoking my joint thinking, damn, this is really awesome.
Despite tensions on set, the film was moving along and playing with many new ideas. Still, The Return of the Living Dead had at least one more trick up its sleeve to turn the zombie genre on its head.
You know, through the movie, Jimmy and I, we have this slow process of transforming into these ghouls.
We just took over. I don't know how it happened.
James, Karen, and Tom have that whole moment where they were breaking down and slowly feeling the rigor mortis, which I thought was genius.
The city ambulance, its emergency lights flashing, pulls up in the mortuary back lot. 2 paramedics in raincoats jump out and run in.
I just love the scene where the paramedics come in and James, Karen, and Tom are turning into zombies.
These medics are the ones that measured the characters as they started to get sick.
You know, they're taking their temperatures and then they switch places and they take their temperatures again and they're like,
no blood pressure, no pulse.
And they're like, what do you mean no blood pressure, no pulse? you know, and they're like just, you know, just making all these groaning noises.
I wanted emotion, you know, from the scene. I wanted to be blown away, and it's the paramedics coming in and the incredulity at the fact that these guys are dead.
Are you saying we're dead?
No, obviously I didn't mean you were really dead.
There was a paramedic who was, I don't know, he lost the part. He didn't do it quite well.
The first actor who was originally cast as the other paramedic, I think, again, he was more concerned with what was going around on the set rather than actually playing his part. So I think that became kind of irksome after a while for Dan, and that's probably why he got replaced.
So there was a new paramedic, a stand-in, who came in, Drew, who got that part.
I suggested that I knew an actor, a young actor, who would be perfect for the role. At least I thought so.
And Jules pulled me aside and he said, "This guy's bombing. So I'm going to suggest you to do the role. Do you think you can do it?" I said, my eyes closed.
Drew was great. I mean, stepping in at the 11th hour, as it were, we got along great right away.
I was always a little tweaked because Jim had what I considered to be the best line of the two paramedics, which was room temperature.
70 degrees.
Well, what's that?
Room temperature.
I was pissed I didn't get that line.
And proving that the fear of no escape and uncomfortable filming conditions have no bounds, the paramedics found themselves in the thick of the zombie attack.
It was cold. It was a cold, wet, damp, wet shoot. And we were like zombies.
I think Dan had a good sense of humor, but I mean, it was, you know, it was time to get down to business and let's get on with it. You know, don't make more out of this than it really needs to be. So it was a lot of fun.
It was miserable filming those scenes because I actually think that they actually put the water that they used to create the fake rain, I actually think they must have stored it in vats of ice. Before we shot that scene, he came up to me, he goes, "Okay, I don't want you to scream." I said, "Why not?" He goes, we'll find a professional screamer to put it in later. So I thought to myself, screw that, I'm going to scream. And I did, and I'm pretty sure that it's my scream that they finally wound up using in the final thing.
As I'm stepping out of the back of the ambulance, I hear him scream, and I go, "Jerry?" I said, "Well, if your name is Jerry, then what should my name be? I mean, we're listed as paramedic 1 and 2. He says, "I know. I'll be Tom and you'll be Jerry because we've got Bert and Ernie. Why not have Tom and Jerry in here as well?"
Out of the chaos of the medical workers' gruesome demise, a humorous and iconic line of dialogue was born. A zombie crawling into the ambulance cab, picking up a radio mic and saying,
"Send more paramedics."
Yeah. It's so clever. I mean, the humor behind that is great.
The whole "send more paramedics" just was hilarious.
And they got a nice meal. So why don't we get on the radio and call more in so that we can have some more dinner?
The zombie extras were great.
And they were terrific, you know. They were terrific.
Though the film's characters had seen their share of on-screen deaths at the hands of the living dead, one such victim was about to make a spectacular return.
I remember when I saw the storyboards that Bill Stout did for When I Am Reborn, I was horrified that I had become one of these things, and I was just like letting out like a scream of horror.
The masked version of Trash was an idea that Bill Stout had where her jaw could distend beyond a normal size when she goes to bite this hobo in the street, her first kill.
One of the makeup guys did a live cast of Linnea's face for me to work on. I put clay on top of that and then sculpted the face over that.
Bill Stout had it in his shop, and he had actually sort of like roughed out what he thought the face should look like.
And then once I was finished with the sculpture and had Dan's approval, then Tony Gardner did the detailing on the face of the skin texture and everything.
The mouth was way down here, where I'm biting in the close shots. So the mouth moved way down here. And I actually asked them to have a doctor come out and give me a Valium, because I was I hate, having prosthetics on my face. And, it was a pretty grueling shoot.
Dan wanted me to play the homeless guy with the shopping cart. Graham Henderson figured I had enough on my plate being the production designer, and so he nixed that idea.
I had a great time doing the scene where I'm just coming like cat-like at the bum. I felt like I was just, you know, going in for prey. And it was a real fun scene to do because I could, you know, really wiggle my ass and just like come at him and just like, you know, take a bite.
I was like, ooh, that's creepy.
And, you know, I loved the expression on his face where he like first sees me and he's like, oh man, a chick, naked chick. And then I get closer and he goes, oh no, bad chick, you know? I love that part.
Arguably one of the most gruesome, powerful, and above all, bloody death scenes was reserved for my character, Scuzz.
My death scene, I would say, is probably my favorite scene in the movie.
The fellow who gets his head bitten off by the half-corpse about 3/4 of the way through the picture and dies a gory death.
I wasn't one of those guys who dreamed of doing really heavy drama or Shakespearean monologues. I wanted to, like, you know, ride a horse, get killed, shoot a gun, be an alien, perhaps be a talking ape. These were the things I was attracted to as an actor. So in that one scene, I got to battle zombies, chop a zombie's arm off, get pulled through a window, get bit in the head by a zombie, shoot gallons of blood all over everything, and die on screen.
I think we shot in continuity order. I think we shot Brian being attacked first. And it basically meant that I was out in the rain in a trash bag, I think, at the time. Puppeteering this rod puppet version of it, grabbing Brian's arm. And again, this is super low tech. And we grab Brian, and Brian basically has to create the half-corpse's performance on top of his own because this thing is stuck on him.
For me, that was pretty much my version of heaven.
Brian's effect was simply an appliance with a pump hose underneath it.
Kenny Myers had taken a mold of my bald head and created a plate that had a little pipe on it, and that was hooked up to a big tank of blood, which was consequently hooked up to a big air compressor.
She bites his head and we start pumping.
And Dan O'Bannon was very adamant that he wanted a tremendous amount of blood to shoot out of my head.
And he was covered in blood.
He made it seem alive, and he falls back with it. And as it fell forward, I remember all the vertebrae sort of accordioning off of the armature and basically into the mud. But they got the shot that they needed.
This was a one-take deal because I destroyed the set. And they had 2 cameras on it. The crew was covered in plastic. And I shot blood everywhere and then proceeded to die a tragic death. I was always very upset. I took umbrage with Dan O'Bannon that my character did not come back to life.
Working with Brian is always a pain in the ass.
I think I had a pretty good excuse that when I get bit, I'm outside in the pouring trioxin-infused rain. Why didn't I come back to life? Why did I not come back to life and have more scenes?
If you have Brian Peck for a friend, you don't need an enemy.
Though another character had been violently killed, the scene was more than shots of rampant carnage. It set the stage for yet another of the film's remarkable and unforgettable creations.
I don't understand what you want with it, Ernie.
The first time I went in to talk about building the half-corpse in earnest, I was introduced to Bill Stout. And Bill actually had 2 production illustrations of the character. One was the character tied to a table, and the other one was the character sort of screaming and standing up.
When this young kid came in to actually do something which was a pretty tough looking skeleton, I really wasn't overly confident that he could pull it off.
I remember 2 weeks later when I brought the finished half-corpse to set, I went into the art department and literally just laid it on the ground on a blanket, and Bill Stout came over and checked it out. And he was thrilled that we put everything into it that, you know, he was after.
He pulled it off and did a really good job, and probably in hindsight I probably didn't pat him on the back and say he did a good job, but I think I was pleasant to him afterwards.
I think what Tony Gardner created with that half-corpse was like the most amazing thing because it's flawless.
Dan wanted really bright blue eyes and blonde hair. And I remember getting into a debate with Bill Stout and Dan O'Bannon about the nipples on the half corpse and how she needed a nightgown, and Dan wanted to see the nipples, and Bill thought it would be a rating issue.
I'm busting in the damn head.
My fondest memory on set for Return of the Living Dead was puppeteering the half corpse.
He needed a couple of different puppeteers to operate the half corpse, and we were all kind of crammed under that mortuary exam table.
As a medical man, this thing is talking, so I figured we can communicate. Let's get it on the slab and tie it down and find out what this whole thing is about.
Why do you eat people?
Not people, brains.
It was so real, like the way the animatronics work, way the eyes and the mouth move, and then it turned his head.
The tailbone flipped. What was left of the tailbone was a wonderful touch. And there was old Dan, after every scene, running in and pouring a little glycerin coming out of the spinal fluid.
There's a line in the film where they're talking to the half corpse, and she says it takes away the pain.
The half corpse, being able to talk to them, that interview was, to me, that was incredible.
And I conned Brian Peck into playing the voice for the half corpse when we were filming that.
So he asked me to do it because none of the other guys were really comfortable doing dialogue or acting opposite Don Calfa in that scene.
I can feel myself rot.
And the course is quite credible. It tells you that, what is it, why do you want to do that? The pain, it kills the pain. And I say, well, that makes a little bit of sense, I guess.
It hurts to be dead.
Dan was referring to the consumption of the endorphins that the brain produces. Endorphins are a natural opiate that your brain makes. It's a painkiller that your brain produces.
Drugs, like, for them, are brains. It makes the pain go away for them. They're like drug addicts, but they're brain addicts.
A lot of people come up and say, hey, your character was the first one to say, brains, I need brains to make the pain go away.
I was probably as surprised as anybody when I saw Return of the Living Dead, or when I first read the script, that they were going after brains. It doesn't bother me one bit. I was entertained by it, and a lot of people got a chuckle out of it.
I remember someone later saying to me that they were somewhat disappointed and went, oh, they replaced your voice for the half corpse with someone else. And I was like, it's a chick. You didn't see the rotting tits?
When the lady was on the table, and I was going hysterical, and Don smacked me. He slapped me. Well, in the script, he slaps me, and that's it. So we shooting, and Don goes, hey, you get all this. He said, cut. Don, we could see you holding back.
I said, look, Don, come here. He came over there, hit him twice. Slapped him once, but then hit him again. Don't tell him you're going to do it, just hit him hard the second time.
And then he goes, and action. That slapped the hell out of me.
And he did that. I didn't think Don would do it. He went in and hit him once and then hit him again. Miguel was just stunned, but played it, stayed in his character.
You see, I have a feeling Miguel was tough and could take whatever Don dished out.
I swear to you, as soon as they say cut, I charged Don. I was going to kick his ass, and Dan stopped me.
We were in the moment, as they would say in the method, both of us.
It was fantastic.
With both Frank and Freddie painfully transforming into the undead, it was clear to the living that the threat was no longer just outside, but now in the morgue with them.
I'm not leaving Freddie!
I just love it when they're in that chapel and Tina's crying over her boyfriend that's just like becoming a zombie and, just dying.
We were in it so deeply, and we all loved it so much, and Dan encouraged it, which was really a great talent.
Mugging and hamming it up, that's what he was asked to do by the filmmaker.
We just had the best time.
It's fun.
What was, to me, really unique that I had never seen before was the moment where you can actually see the world from somebody who is becoming a living dead, a zombie.
One thing that can leave this world suffering.
That was a very pivotal moment in the film for us, for our two characters.
What? Live.
I started chasing Tina around because I want to eat her brains. And then the full-on zombie mode at that point.
The whole attack scene when they've locked me in the chapel with them was a lot of rehearsal because it was very physical.
I was actually foaming at the mouth. Very simple, Alka-Seltzer. I didn't really have rabies or anything like that.
But we'd kind of go with the whole bag of tricks.
One of my favorite scenes was in the chapel where they throw acid on my eyes and I can't see.
That part is a crazy part. It really kicks ass in there too.
Breaking through the door, going down the hallway soon after that. It was a lot of fun.
Famously, Kabuki Ghoul on Poor Tom.
The makeup for Freddy after they threw the acid in my eyes was a prosthetic, and they kind of glued it onto my face. And I think that it took about an hour and a half to get the whole thing on and, you know, make me look like I was dying, already dead.
And I remember doing different variations on it until finally I had to do such outlandish colors on it.
Once I had the prosthetic on, I could, there's like little slits, I could see a little bit out of it. It was a lot of fun, and then, you know, just smelling people's brains and wanting to eat them, particularly Tina's.
Deep into filming, and despite a locked screenplay, there was one moment an actor was adamant about changing, having decided his character would rather die with dignity.
I was just thinking of the scene that made me really, really sad, and it still does if I see it or hear it. It's when James Karen decides, you know, he doesn't want to become this zombie thing.
I hated the idea of standing around in the rain with the rest of the zombies, waiting for the nuke at the end. So I said to Dan, you know, I'd love to cremate myself in the crematorium. And he said, well, Jesus, how do you know how to run the machine? I said, all you have to do is get a shot of me when I'm sitting with Tommy when we're getting sick. And all I have to do is say, I can operate that goddamn thing. And then, a day or two later, we shot the crematorium scene. I really don't know whether it was written. And Dan just let it go.
He just, like, you know, pulls out the thing to burn himself in and closes the door, and it's just like, it's a great scene. I almost cry every time.
A lot of people will say, that moment when you took off your ring and kissed it and put it on the toggle switch, those things just happened, and that's what was so great about this movie.
There are actual visual images that stick in some people's heads more than the story, like the crematorium oven smoking.
That, to me, is a powerful, powerful scene.
A tragic death.
And facing almost certain death at the hands of Freddy, another unexpected tender moment was shared between Tina and Ernie.
Don Calfa, I learned so much from him in the attic scene. It was just, he was wonderful.
Tom's about to come through the door, and I said, what if I intimate that I'm going to blow her brains out before we get eaten? I said, just like Stagecoach when John Carradine was going to kill the pregnant woman.
I loved the fact that he was going to kill me before and save me the agony of it all.
Don has that gun on her, and he's going to shoot her because if he comes through, he knows she will be met with a very horrible death.
I just keep on thinking, man, he should have fucking pulled the trigger, man. Pull the fucking trigger. But he didn't.
He's doing this wonderfully noble thing by shooting her, and you feel like in that gun, there's one bullet, and that's it.
It's a very emotional scene, and it got to a point where I couldn't cry anymore, and because I've been crying and screaming for so long, and I went to the makeup artist and I said, oh my gosh, I don't know what to do. I cannot get tears to come out of my face. And she's blowing peppermint in my face. Let's try this, let's try that. And the peppermint didn't work. And so we got to the set and I said the same thing to Don. And I said, Don, gosh, I can't get tears to come out anymore. Listen to this, honey, listen to this music.
It was a compilation tape of music that that moved me very much. Mind Games by John Lennon.
And I would put the headset on, listen to the music, and it was such an emotional soundtrack. And I take that off and I go, okay, I'm ready.
And to tell you the truth, when that door popped open, it was fucking creepy.
Dawn, in reality, got a little overheated, kind of hyperventilated, and really got very faint, and we had to stop, and Dawn had to sit down, and he was feeling very kind of dizzy and woozy. So just as a precaution, they actually called 911, and I remember these real-life paramedics showing up to kind of check out Dawn's vital signs and to make sure he was okay, and the first thing out of their mouth was, oh, you don't look so good. You look very pale. And we had to explain to the paramedics that Dawn, in fact, was wearing makeup, and that everything was okay.
But not everything would work out quite as well for the characters in the finale of the film. A moment seen as simultaneously appropriate, bleak, and most of all, ironic.
I liked the way everything cut with all the, different things happening.
The film's ending, I thought it was wonderful and fitting.
The fact that a movie can end negatively, so to speak, for this kind of movie, after all, it is zombies.
What else could they do? They had to contain this awful, awful thing. And of course, it was a dumb way to do it, but that was the whole point of the Army, as I say in the picture.
Typical Army fuck-up.
I think it's pretty clear. Everyone's dead. A nuclear bomb kills everyone. I love it.
I think it was a bleak moment when the nuclear bomb hit because, you're hoping that, they're only going to, do a little bit and, these people, some of them will survive or something like that.
Well, as far as the ending and dropping the nuke on the town where the zombies were, and I thought that was a little over the top.
I have to say I was disappointed with the bomb, but I don't know how else they could have ended it.
The cloud is going to contain the seeds to spread out all over the country.
It's starting to rain and, it's going to start all over again.
I love that. It's just going to continue. It's just going to go on.
They haven't learned a damn thing.
It's a grand comeuppance for humanity.
The Return of the Living Dead finally wrapped principal photography on August 18, 1984, and the time had come to edit the footage. But the lingering worry on everyone's mind was, would the film work?
We made the picture in 6 weeks. It's a tough schedule to make. I think it turned out the way that Dan had envisaged.
The movie was so well made, and there was never any fear of it, going over the top as far as the comedy aspect or what was going on.
What was interesting to me was, and I was new at editing, and looking at the footage that we had, I couldn't tell what kind of a movie it was really going to be.
Well, the mix of horror and comedy, it was a different kind of humor. It was a flippant kind of satirical humor.
We were really lucky to have that thrown into the film, whether by accident or on purpose.
Everybody knew each other as a group and knew sort of what the parameters were to perform. So I think Dan just sort of had to finesse that in editing and make it work.
Dan would come in and set his sandwich down and look at his cigar, and he'd look at the images, and he'd say, okay, we want to do this, 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 and this.
It was a big lift for all of us that the producers were so pleased with what they had seen.
I was shocked how well the comedy and the horror worked, together. Like, a lot of times when you get into a situation where you're scared, you don't realize how much humor is in there. And Dan saw that.
I think the picture was never really verging on being silly or ridiculous. I think you always thought the movie was going to stand up by itself as a horror movie.
It was a perfect blend of horror and comedy. And the feelings that I experienced once I saw the final cut were, I've never felt anything since.
And I think we managed to pretty much stay on the right side of seeing a horror movie that just had a little bit of tongue-in-cheek.
As post-production on the horror comedy continued, director Dan O'Bannon made the decision to infuse his film with a soundtrack and score that would convey the movie's horror, humor, and attitude.
It was great they didn't have a rock and roll heavy metal soundtrack to it, like a lot of movies were doing. They put the punk in there and just turned it up, and it was just so cool to hear that.
There's so many great bands out there. There's The Clash, there's The Damned, there's, The Cramps.
I hate punk music. I find it to be loud, useless noise.
I didn't care that much about the music. I mean, I didn't know who those bands were. I don't like punk music.
However, it made that movie work. It couldn't have been more perfect.
I guess it worked because I liked the movie, but I wasn't consciously thinking about, oh, isn't this great that they did this punk music and I have to rush out and buy the soundtrack album.
I thought that the bit of the music into it was perfect. I think being able to introduce one of the songs on a boombox that the punkers are listening to was the perfect way to sort of slide that sort of attitude in.
SSQ was approached by Enigma Records. We were really thrilled that one of our songs would be so featured in the film. We'll make love till we die.
All the songs sort of fit the mood in a weird way, which I think is very surprising.
The Return of the Living Dead was released to hungry horror audiences on August 16, 1985, with an anxious cast, crew, and director hoping their efforts to combine gory thrills with sly humor would pay off.
The original plan was to get this movie out in sort of late summer of 1984, but it kept being pushed back and really didn't appear until August of 1985, almost a year after it was originally meant to come out. But at that time, I said, I think honestly this is going to be one of our biggest grossing pictures. And the look I got from everyone was as if I had just stood up and dropped my pants and, mimed an unspeakable act. I mean, everyone literally looked at me like I'd gone totally nuts.
So you kind of live and learn and you go, look, expectations can turn on a dime.
And then one person stood up and said, as far as we're concerned, this picture is one step above pornography. And he sat down and that was it. And that was the moment where the bulb went off in my head, because they did indeed think it was almost a porn movie. Horror got no respect whatsoever back then.
Was it going to win an Academy Award? No. Was it a movie that you can be proud of? Yeah, I think so. I don't think it's something that you can say was something that you never wanted to see again or didn't want to be part of and wanted to take your name off it.
Prior to Star Wars, studios didn't want to hear anything about science fiction, horror, fantasy, because those were B pictures. Star Wars changed everything, and Jaws, of course, 2 years earlier in 1975. Suddenly, horror and science fiction, people started to think, well, maybe they can be A pictures. But that really hadn't percolated down to the general level of executives.
It was so different from what everybody else was doing.
It had this really weird mix of horror and comedy and punks, and it was just a picture that the studio suits, and I was one of them at the time, for the most part, did not get. So I became kind of very much like a biblical voice in the wilderness.
It couldn't have gone wrong. It was just too neat.
Audiences and critics agreed. The film was well received by both, making more than its $4 million budget on opening weekend. With a final domestic box office of $14.2 million, it seemed clear that the goal to reinvent the zombie movie had been achieved.
Return of the Living Dead is one of those rare occasions where both the people who made it and the people who see it are happy. I think that's a wonderful, wonderful testament to a picture, don't you?
When I first saw it, I was so impressed. I was just so excited. I thought, wow, I got a film under my belt. Look at that. And it was really exciting to see.
I always get scared before I go to see something I've done because, you do things and you think, oh, they're going to be great. So I, let my expectations down when I see things. So when I went, I was like ecstatic. I mean, the music rocked it. The editing was amazing. The whole cast was great. Everything was really good in it.
When I saw it, and with all the special effects added, I had no idea all the special effects were going to be so good. And of course, the actors all came through beautifully, and I think the whole look of the film was wonderful.
It was a thrill. It really was. Didn't want to see it end. My 10 minutes of fame.
I thought I was in a movie. I was like this, I'm in a movie.
The first time I remember seeing the movie was, I think it was opening day, and it was at the Man Bruin Westwood, and I walked down the aisles, up and down, up and down, up and down, around, and, you know, hoping that somebody will, like, sort of see something. I got up in the middle, got popcorn, kept on walking around, and nobody recognized me. It was so sad.
I was completely surprised and shocked when I saw the finished film that it was as funny as it was.
And I remember sitting there going, this is fun.
Oh, what a relief. This is a very funny film.
I don't think that they told us to make it funny. It's just happened that way.
I always called it horrific. That was the kind of term I came up with because it was funny, but it was hard to watch at the same time.
I thought it was hilarious. I finally sort of got it. I hadn't quite grokked the film until then, you know. But once I saw it, I said, wow, this is really something different.
I was very pleased. It was what I envisioned, pretty much.
It was amazing to me seeing what was there as, you know, on the dailies and then seeing it come out the other side was phenomenal. It was really, really great.
My son took me to it on 42nd Street in New York City. A short time after that, at midnight, I've never heard an audience go so hog wild.
Kill that bitch! God damn, get her!
They kept saying to the audience,
Hit that bitch! Get that goddamn zombie off her back!
And they yelled out and screamed and laughed and roared.
I think Dan is a shame that he's not around to realize that he did a good movie and that it has the longevity that it's had.
Writer-director Dan O'Bannon passed away on December 17, 2009, having made an indelible Hollywood impression with iconic movies for which he will always be remembered.
Dan was dying, which most of us didn't know at that time how serious it was, of a disease, a major disease.
I was shocked when I heard that Dan passed away. I'd known that he'd been sick for a long time. When he did pass away, it just didn't seem real that he did. You know, he seemed invincible.
I was such an admirer of Dan's long before I got involved with the film. You know, Alien for me is one of my all-time favorite movies, and I was so excited to be working with Dan. The fact that we're still talking about this movie is a testament to Dan's, you know, vision, and made a great movie.
Dan went away too soon. All the scripts he would have written will not be written now. All the films he may have directed will not be directed by him.
Dan really knew what he was talking about.
He was very talented, very knowledgeable.
I liked him. He was funny. He was cool. He was always saying kind of smart things I didn't understand.
He's a unique individual. I'll never forget Dan or working with Dan, and he was one of the great lights in my life.
It's all Dan O'Bannon, his vision, and his bringing his vision to fruition is a genius. R.I.P.
I think he's happy with hopefully up wherever he is now, that he can look down and say, yeah, not too bad a job.
Decades later, the legacy of The Return of the Living Dead continues to grow. What started out as a sequel to a classic horror movie has grown to become a genre classic in its own right. A sexy punk rock zombie thrill ride filled with horror, humor, and by all cast and crew accounts, heart. It remains a high point in 80s horror cinema and a film that its audience, and those who brought it to the screen, will never forget.
I would have to say that it was an amazing thrill to work on one of the most successful, funny, scary, rock and roll, punk, horror, zombie movies of all time.
I can't be more pleased about anything more than the way it has lived on for all these years and seems to speak to generations.
I'm very proud of it. I'm proud it's lasted all these years and has such a great following.
I'm just surprised that it's had the legs that it has, and I'm glad that it has, and I'm sorry that Dan isn't alive to see, you know, how his movie has, you know, lasted.
I think any time that you can make a movie or any work of art or entertainment that's as powerful as Night of the Living Dead or Return of the Living Dead, and people enjoy it so much, it's their favorite movie and all that kind of stuff, and that's just terrific.
I made a lot of good friends that are friends to this day. And it's interesting to see how younger generations see work that you did decades ago and you have long since forgotten about have affected them.
That experience was major on somebody who was 21 years old, stepping out. And I will be forever thankful and appreciative for them trusting me.
I want to thank the fans for keeping this film alive for so many years and for their devotion to this film.
Return of the Living Dead has survived as a cult classic this long because it was unique. It broke ground. It was something different at the time, and really it's still different now.
I think it's really, actually, I think why this movie has so much staying power is that they like to scare 8-year-olds. That's what I do. I mean, I stumble down the stairs. Oh my God. I have blood out of my mouth, and I fall limply on some poor little 8-year-old's lap, and they start screaming. And I've ruined lots of kids' lives, and I'm proud of it.
I feel lucky that I was a part of it. At the time, I didn't think I was, and now I feel like I was the luckiest guy in the world just to be in this thing.
Entertainment that never gets old, never dies, and may Return of the Living Dead always live on. Titties.
I feel like I have been the luckiest girl in the world to be in a film like Return of the Living Dead and work with the cast, the crew, everything. I just feel like I was the luckiest person.
It will always be one of the most important things that ever happened to me. Probably the most fun I've ever had during a summer in my life.
And I realized that this was a magnificent piece of filmmaking.
I didn't know that it would take off as it did and have the lasting power that it has through the years.
It was one of the happiest occasions of my work life. It was just a wonderful artistic time, a fulfillment of an actor's dream.
It really has become a cult classic, and with a lot of legs. I mean, if you even watch it today, it still holds up. And it's been a real pleasure. The ride has been fun. I realized as I worked more how special of a production and a family it was shooting Return of the Living Dead.
Thank you for the memories. Thanks to those fans. I can't believe I'm getting emotional. But it's just been this past, I guess the past, true to Tina, honestly. Oh my gosh. It's just been such a great ride. It's just, thank you so much. It's just been great.
Over the years, the public, various audiences have treated me with the greatest kindness, and I am very grateful. And I do not exaggerate when I say that I love you all. My life would not have been as good as it's been without the people that have come to my movies and come to hear me speak and responded and talked to me. So, if I die tomorrow, bless you all.
Marker?
Ready? All right.
Oh, I have one little story.
Okay.
Let's go, come on. No.
Frank was 45-year-old factory foreman. I was then 64.
What it is, I said. But he had to say, yes, come in.
What? I can smell your brains? It's a question. I mean, it says a question right there. It's a question. It says it's a question. It's not a statement.
We don't have to tell you anything.
We think you should.
I love you.
Go choke a chicken choke. Oh my God.
Jesus.
I'm sorry, that's my heart-lung machine back there. It's keeping me alive.
B. Arthur was my boyfriend.
I have to really search for a fond memory. Oh, that could have been me. Look what that guy's doing.
Can't we just incorporate it? I go, and then, oh, that's a nice sounding train. And then we keep going.
How's the picture? How many chins can you see?
My favorite part is Miguel's cock piece.
I never had a prosthetic piece. Never, ever.
I'll get back to Dan in just a moment.
I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding.
The rest of you, I think that you should, I don't know, do a documentary or some sort.
Tonight, we'll make love till we die. Make love, die, baby, lie. We'll make love till we die.
I know. Okay. Let me do again.